Welcome everyone to tonight's Omaha Table Talk. My name is Dominic Green. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Programs and Faculty at Inclusive Communities. Before we start tonight, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Native and Indigenous people who lived and took care of the land that we gather on tonight. That belong to the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Oto Missouri, Sante Dakota Sioux, Kansas, Iowa, Cheyenne, and Winnebago people. We honor with gratitude and pay our respects to all Native and Indigenous people. Omaha Table Talks, or as we refer to them as OTTs, was initially recreated in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities Omaha. In 2012, Inclusive Communities acquired OTTs and shifted them to a larger public discussion over comfort food. Due to COVID-19, we have shifted them to being held on Zoom, and we always welcome you to have a snack and beverage with you during these discussions. We also are looking forward to and always ask for evaluations and feedback, as we're always looking to grow and have these become better. And so invite you to fill out that evaluation form at the end of tonight's conversation that will be provided. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, Lozier Foundation, Cox Communication, and American Family Insurance for allowing for these events to still be held. And now I will turn it over to Candace to discuss some few housekeeping guidelines for us to keep in mind.
Hi, y'all. Good evening. My name is Candace Freeman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Programs and Curriculum Manager here at IC. I just wanted to go over quickly a few housekeeping things as we start to approach this conversation together tonight. Let me get them here for you. First, please, we invite you to update your name on your Zoom little Brady Bunch square. If you right click, there's 3 little dots and you can change your name. We invite you to add your pronouns should you feel comfortable. With that, we do ask that you keep yourself on mute. We would love to hear all of the awesomeness that you want to say or project into the space during our breakout room portion, but during our panel conversation, we just ask that you mute your background so we don't pick up any feedback or background noise. With that, we have expanded our conversations to offer a variety of interpretive services. We have Pam, who is doing ASL for us, and she should be pinned right on the computer here so you can see her. And then we also have Paulina and Andres from World Speaks doing Spanish interpretation. Should you need any of the interpretive services, please just message, call in privately so we can get you on the right channel. For everybody in the space, this is also a reminder for you, since we do have an added extra layer of some things so everybody can access the conversation. We ask that you please just speak clearly and not too quickly, so we make sure that none of the great things that you are going to share or say into the space get lost on any of the channels. Oh, yep. Colin just put it in the chat. Please message him if you need anything. Also, last and foremost, we want to see your shiny, bright faces, but I also know that it has been a long work day. Maybe it's been a long week and it's only Tuesday. Who knows? If you would like to be on camera, we invite you to be on camera, but we also know that life is happening in the background. So please know if you do need to remain camera off, that is all right too. I think that is it, Dominic. I will pass it back to you. Before we go into our breakout room portion, we'll just go over a few other extra things during that time.
Awesome. And I'd like to just thank our table facilitators who are here. And we're going to get started in this conversation. So at this time, it's my pleasure to pass it over to a friend and someone that I truly respect, Tia Manning, who is going to be moderating this conversation, and she will introduce the rest of the panel.
All right. I almost said good morning. Good evening, everyone. And I will start real quick. I'll introduce myself, and then I will let the folks that are on the panel also introduce themselves as well. My name is Tia Manning. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a mental health therapist here in Omaha, Nebraska. I work a lot with folks that have been harmed by sexual violence, and I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and moderating tonight. And with that, I'm going to throw it to Jessyca.
Thank you, Tia. I'm Jessyca Vandercoy. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Omaha, Nebraska. So that means basically I work in systems with individuals. Over the last 20 years, ironically, have worked in mostly in systems that are designed to protect people and keep them safe, but are actually really rooted in violence and punitive measures. So I come with the experience in working with sexual assault survivors, domestic violence survivors, people who've experienced human trafficking and exploitation, human beings who are or have been incarcerated, and those individuals and families who've experienced our child welfare system.
And Miss Carla, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Walker. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I recently celebrated a year out on parole. I'm a military veteran. I'm also an advocate and survivor, and I'm honored to be here with you tonight.
Thank you both for introducing yourself. So I'm just going to jump right in. And so tonight we're talking about safety and violence. And so I would like to start with the question, what does safety mean to you? Whoever wants to take the question.
I guess I'll take it. For me, safety is being in a space and feeling able to breathe and exist without concern or worry or fear.
When I think of safety, I tend to, this is probably part of just my clinical work, but I think it's super important on a community level, is understanding safety in kind of two different categories: emotional safety and physical safety. Emotional safety, exactly what Carla was saying, right? So the right to be and feel as though we can be exactly who we are, right? So sometimes I'll explain it to parents is feeling safe and being safe, right? So not having the threat of violence or harm is being safe. Feeling safe is something really different and complex, and comes from relationships and community.
Thank you both. Yeah, I wanted to start with that question just to set the foundation, because safety to everybody, I think, there's a different definition, right? Like, so for safety to me, the first thought depends on the space. Because safety isn't a uniform answer. Like, if I'm safe here in my house, then when I go to McDonald's, because I'm having McDonald's delivered for my kids, doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to feel safe at McDonald's, right? So being able to realize that is going to be different for everybody that will be here tonight. So I just wanted to pose that question first. So, all right. My other question that I have is, what uplifting and thinking about like systemic violence, do you think that has played a role within justice?
I would say absolutely yes. I think the system is working exactly as it was designed. And it is the dismantling or reworking of it isn't about, it's about, going to roots on why systems were designed the way that they were. I think we can't really separate the society that we live in that appreciates punitive measures, right? That we appreciate this idea of justice being equivalent to punishment, right? And we do that in all sorts of spaces, and we have deep, long roots that fall on particular lines in that category. But we really do it all individually in our relationships, in the classroom, and then our systems uplift that as well. And we are so eager consistently in all of our systems, our interactions, our relationships to decide good and bad, right? To decide who's worthy and who's not, who gets empathy and who doesn't, what is not that bad and really egregious. We function that way in all of our spaces. And I think that is deeply rooted in the history of this country, but also in all the systems that we build up, right? We decide who gets what based on if people are worthy and deserving or something's not that bad. So I think it absolutely is what makes justice actually not possible, because we define it in a way that is equivalent to punishment, right? As opposed to fair and balanced.
Thank you, Jessyca. Absolutely.
I completely agree with what Jessyca has said. If you hurt me, I need to hurt you. And so then that takes away empathy, that takes away compassion, and it also stifles our ability to heal and to forgive and to move on. And it is so sad to say and to hear, but it does feel like justice is impossible because we've put all these restraints on it.
Absolutely. So that idea of hurt people, right? And so always making sure that we're going to be ahead, and also realizing, uplifting, I think both of y'all mentioned this, the punitive system. So that constant state of, I have to punish you in order for there to be justice. There's no other way to achieve justice without punishment. And so I am going to throw that question back and say, do you agree with that?
Is justice punishment?
Mm-hmm.
Is that your question?
Or is there other ways to get justice?
Oh, our obsession with punishment is quite honestly strange and a barrier to relationships and healing and connections. And I don't know who made it up, but it's hundreds of years old, but absolutely not related to justice. I think where we get confused on the definition of justice is, seeing justice as something that's balanced and equitable and fair. Is what a lot of people would come up with potentially. In fact, if you Google the definition of justice, fair and balanced are probably words that come up with that. The way we use it in our system often is based on our values, right? So a moral code or values, our policies that we develop are a reflection of our values, right? So when we talk about who develops these policies and these systems, it probably does look like justice, right? If those match. And so when we talk about changing these kinds of things, we have to go back down into moral code, right? And that strongly sits in justice equals punishment. And that's how we end up in a space where that does feel congruent. I think we have to go several layers deeper to look at our values as a nation, moral code of conduct, right? There's some work being done around that, but that's hard work. And it starts, I think, actually in families, starts in communities.
I agree, Jessyca, absolutely.
Again, Jessyca, beautifully put. It's interesting that shame is included. So we're just stifled. And man, I have so many different thoughts running through my head right now. But I guess the simplest way to put it is our system is broken. There is a possibility of fixing it. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to be an uphill battle, but there's a possibility. I like to think that I'll still be alive to see it happen. And I hope that I'm a part of it, but for things to continue as they are, they're just not going to work.
Thank you for that, Miss Carla. I also agree with that too. So, and so then with that process, right, like realizing that we all have a different definition or our own unique individual definition of safety. So then we go back to violence and safety. What would healing look like for like on an individual basis, maybe even on a systems look? What would that look like?
When I think of healing and putting words to it, I like the definition, and I didn't make this up, but I also don't know where it came from, is the idea of transcending suffering. And I think we can apply it. I like it because we can apply it on a micro level, right? We can apply it to our individual hurt, right, and pain and trauma. We can apply it to our relationships, right? And we can apply it to systems, right? Recognizing the suffering that occurs within systems, right? A faulty system, a system that is not working, that is not balanced and fair, and being able to see this. I'm a visual person, so I sort of envision this transcending of suffering, which is, to me, is using what's happened and having it move through you, right? Move through a system. We learn from it. We transcend it, and then it becomes something else outside of us. So that is a definition that I tend to go to because I think it can fit in all sorts of places.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessyca.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote you. I wrote a note. You said, survival looks like healing. And I thought that was such a beautiful statement. And then, of course, there's just the discussion of survival and thriving, but again, we all have different definitions. It's just imagining this beautiful place that we can get to.
Right.
It kind of renders me speechless, which is a pretty odd thing, but it does.
Thank you, Miss Carla. Yeah, I was like thinking about like what healing means. And so I've been doing a lot of work lately with like by Resma Menachem, which I highly recommend. So My Grandmother's Hands, where he talks a lot about like somatic work. So how our body works with healing and stuff like that. And I think also too, part of healing, oftentimes so the clinician me is, let's do talk therapy and let's talk it out. And also not realizing how we've stored that trauma and that harm that we've had and been a part of. And so working through those, our body's responses to that trauma, where we tense and like the jaw pain and the constant headaches and stuff like that, I think is a big part of uplifting, part of healing too, because we tend to forget that the longer we don't listen to our body, the more we can have physical ailments and end up in the doctor more and all of that. So I think that's important to consider with healing too.
And I think you can apply that too to system. I always say what doesn't come through us stays in us, right? So when things happen to us, that's kind of what you're describing, is this idea of transcending, but we have to, it's more than talking it through. It's our experiences in our bodies. I think the same thing with our systems, right? Our systems hold old moral codes. Our systems hold old policies and procedures and values, and that unless we're at places like this having these conversations, right, that is a lot of the work. Some of us, want to come down and, sort of dismantle and break it all up. But when we talk about transcending, right, when something terrible has happened and there's been trauma, whether it's us individually, it sticks in us, right? And using that same kind of idea of the impact on our body, right? And being the impact on the structure of our systems, right? And that we have to tend to all of it.
Absolutely, I agree. All right. So then, do either of you think that society has the structure and or place an importance on healing? Like, do they need to make sure that that's part? Does our society need to put that emphasis on healing? Do you think?
Do we need to, or do we?
Let's start with
Or
do.
and do we? Absolutely not. How about definitively no. I'll give you an example of the work that that I have worked with people who've experienced exploitation of trafficking. And although trafficking became an area of concern for a lot of people, where there was a lot of funding and a lot of money that came through to serve people who've experienced human trafficking, I can tell you, as a system, we were really, really focused on catching the bad guy, right? Or girl, and really less focused on what was necessary for transcending that suffering, right? That experience and healing from trauma. Even when we had a nation that was really interested in this type of crime, and it was interested in this type of crime as opposed to responding to the needs of people who had been exploited. I will caveat that by saying we also were uninterested in working with, from a healing perspective, of people who had done harm. And we know that people who traffic people have very similar experiences in their past and in their childhood as people who are trafficked and exploited in that way. And so there was even less interest, I think, in that. And so I give that example because it's a recent crime or issue that our country's been really interested in throwing lots of money at and giving lots of attention to.
Thank you, Jessica.
I guess for me, I've seen some limited programs that are working towards trying to make change, like AVP, which is Alternatives to Violence Project. It's a conflict resolution program. I know that there's restorative justice. I haven't really experienced it a great deal. I've read some about it and have corresponded with some people involved. As long as our judicial system remains punitive, then we're going to repeat these vicious cycles. But I think that getting the word out to some programming that's out there and available to the community is, I believe it's available and I believe it's helpful. It's just, how do we get people involved?
Absolutely. I appreciate both of y'all's input. I was thinking just now too about like looking at violence and safety injustice and how we do folks that have been diagnosed with mental illness, and now using our carceral system as a form of mental health care, right? And how that doesn't promote healing or safety. As somebody that worked within, as a therapist within Douglas County Jail, and seeing firsthand how difficult it is to work with folks that are coming in with that may be in a mental health crisis, and obtaining health care, and to include when they would be released and what that would look like to get them connected to a provider. Average wait could be 3, 6, 7 weeks, months. I mean, it just kind of depends. And so how are we setting people up to make sure that they're not only healing, but that they're safe and not continuing that constant perpetual cycle? So yeah.
Then we put them in an environment that adds more trauma, adds more opportunity for violence, because you're in fear and you need to protect yourself. We just got to end those vicious cycles.
I agree. So then, do you think that law enforcement plays a role in regards to like healing for survivors and or injustice?
I think they do play a role. Right now, it's a negative role. everything is fear. I have to shoot you before you shoot me. I have to hurt you before you have the opportunity to hurt me. And that's a setup for failure. I imagine a world where law enforcement has had the opportunity to go through AVP and do some conflict resolution and have the tools to talk someone down from a situation that does not need to escalate. It seems that law enforcement's really struggling with de-escalating, and it makes sense because of our old patterns and our old beliefs that particular people are more dangerous than others, but we've really got to step back and look at things differently and make some serious positive changes.
And I'm going to be less accommodating too. I think the word enforcement, I think says enough. Until we have a system where law enforcement is seen as a service provider and an equal partner in keeping community safety, you know, peace, there is absolutely no way that law enforcement can have a role. The thing is, a lot of officers or this, you know, the system individuals do have training, right? They do have de-escalation training. They do have you know, training that offers new skills to interact with people who are having symptoms that they don't like, right? And that is true. But you put people even with the best and most training into a system that really sees themselves as enforcers. It doesn't work to be part of healing, right? It doesn't work to be part of fairness, right? It only works to be in a position of power and control, hence the word enforcer, right? And in fact, if you Google enforcer, the definitions, I think you'll be surprised on what comes up, the other words used. So I think it doesn't work. There's a long-standing conversation in the field of social work. And, you know, over the last 2 years, the national organization has come out saying, you know, the way we sort of fix this is we train social workers to work alongside law enforcement. There was huge kickback from a lot of us within the social work profession saying, absolutely not. We can't take a profession that has a code of ethics that says there's dignity and worth of all people, that you have to be a part of dismantling systems that make barrier and inequitable work opportunities for anyone, regardless of who you are, and pair them with a system that is actually designed to enforce laws that are rooted in punishment and violence. It does not work. You cannot do it. And so I think the national organization has definitely backed off on this idea, but I don't think that's the solution either. I don't think pairing law enforcement up with social workers is the right thing to do either.
And so then I think for me, looking at it from a lens of like, just where do we go from here? Because we obviously can't keep going the way that we're going. And I don't know, do we try things and then say, yep, that didn't work? Or, because if we don't, I am truly afraid of where we will head from this moment going forward. Because that wasn't really a statement. That was just more of like a thought that I was processing out loud. But
yeah, I like it.
Good thought.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? I think you know, when recognize that the position from which I'm speaking from is somebody with privilege and who is impacted by our systems disproportionately less than other people. So it's always like, you know, coming in with love and light about what should happen when maybe the system doesn't impact me the same as it does other people. So I want to recognize that. I realize that that is absolutely present. But I think we have to start replacing the way that we operate with other things. We have to have some type of response to the reason we use police, right? Why do the police get called? What did they intervene on? We have to have an alternative, a community response, a human response, a system response. I don't know that I know any of those answers right now, but it's kind of like, when we look at working with people who have, maladaptive coping or are have substance use issues, when we take away something that we know how it works and it feeds our need, and we have to replace it with something else that's healthy, right? We can't just say we aren't doing that anymore, right? And as good as that would feel to say, goodbye system that sucks, when we look at sustainable and authentic change, it is little things add to big things with an idea that we are actually creating a system side by side of what's already existing, right? And it ends up going like this. And so I think that's the hard part, right? But it starts with community. It starts with relationships and connections. It starts with stop being so obsessed with isolating people when we've decided they're bad. We isolate people everywhere in every system. We ban people, right? If you have a certain type of crime, we have rules that make it so that you could potentially never interact with human beings, even if you're living in the community. You can't work in certain places, you can't live in certain places. Look what we do in classrooms, right? And that work, deciding that justice is not equal to punishment, and that we don't resolve things by just isolating people and saying you're bad, we're done, starts with what we do as parents to our children. How does it start with what we do with children in our classroom? How do we treat coworkers? And how do we work out our hierarchy and our systems of the boss and the employee? We do it absolutely everywhere, that it makes sense that we have systems that build around us that make us really comfortable, right? And so I think of just being able to build something side by side as we, offset what's happening now, actually starts, like most really good, sustainable, authentic change, on one-on-one relationships in our, what's closest to us. And it sounds kind of hokey at times, but I really do think that that's where we need to go, which means all of us have a sense of ownership and responsibility to be a part of the work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That was amazing, Jessyca. It does take little steps.
Ask me to repeat it and I won't be able to.
You don't need to, it's recorded.
All right,
So
perfect.
if we're looking at little steps, then we have to make sure in our communities that people have the proper nutrition. We need to make sure that they're in safe housing, that they're learning in schools. And all this is doable. I love the love and light, because this is something that communities can do. We can provide this, we can create this.
Thank you. And with that, I appreciate y'all so much taking time this evening and to share a panel with y'all. Yeah, and with that, I'm going to pass it to Candace.
Yes, thank you all. I know I've told you 100 times, and I will tell you 100 more. We really do appreciate you, Jessyca, Tia, and Carla, for all of your amazing insights and knowledge and feedback and perspective on all of these things that we've discussed tonight. we are going to go over a few breakout room agreements before we get sent out into your breakout rooms. So just a few things. One speaker, one mic. That is our way of just making sure that you are muting that background noise when you are not speaking. So anybody who is speaking can have that space and have the floor. Zoom does a great job of kind of stopping you if you speak over someone. So it's typically pretty easy. Just make sure your mic is muted when you're not speaking. The Vegas twist, due to the nature of what might be discussed or might be said into the breakout rooms, we want you to take the lessons from those stories out of this space. Share those with the community, share those with your friends, share those with that circle of people, because that is how we are going to change some of these systems. More of the private details, we ask that you just keep in that Zoom space with the folks that you have an opportunity to spend community with. Make space, take space. This is another one to just make sure that we are providing everyone in the space adequate amount of airtime to say what they think or feel, should they feel comfortable. Keep an open mind. We know that everybody is coming at this conversation from a multitude of ways or spaces on the spectrum. We just ask that you keep an open mind, listen, take in what is said in that space, so you can continue to explore those topics or themes beyond the Zoom room. And then last but not least, be respectful. Be respectful of everyone in your space. I don't think I really need to elaborate on that one much further. Y'all know what you should and shouldn't do. So you will be sent out into breakout rooms. Just one reminder, if you do need any of our interpretive services, please message Colin in the chat and we can make sure to get you in the right room or in the right space. You do not need to do absolutely anything. The Zoom will send you into the space. Our table facilitators in both of those rooms will have a list of processing questions that y'all can discuss and think about and kind of engage in conversation. One thing I do ask is for you to designate a speaker that is not the table facilitator. So when we do come back into the full Zoom room, we can share out any of those nuggets of information or moments of enlightenment or phrases or words that was said maybe during the panel conversation or in your Zoom space that really resonated or stuck with you. That's all I got. I will see y'all when you return, and I hope you have fruitful conversation. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everyone. So we have entered that time where we will share out what we have talked about, learn from each other in our share out group. So who from room 1, which is Colin's group, is going to be sharing out for us?
Hello, Chelsea, she, her. So a few thoughts from our group. We talked a lot about, justice. And in that conversation, we talked about, how justice looks differently for everyone. But we talked about how empathy and validation and listening and healing are all aspects of that. Kind of expanded on some thoughts on interpersonal skills of giving and receiving feedback, setting boundaries, building accountability into our daily practices as part of that. There were some thoughts and reflections about it was maybe a newer concept to really think about how those who cause harm have experience harm themselves in other ways, and so that we really reflected on healing as a part of justice to address that. We also reflected more on defining safety, justice, and healing, and having those conversations, knowing that they look different for everyone. And I think that was also illuminating to a lot of us in our group that that we have to dive into what that looks like for ourselves and putting words to it and talking about it with folks, so that we're building this greater understanding of really what this world free of violence looks like and how we practice justice and accountability without punishment. And yeah, we did hit on the fact that, yeah, that punishment does not equal justice. So what are other things that we can ground into that really help us in having a thriving and vibrant society? And one of the things that I also will mention that was is like our basic needs. And really, I mean, some of us in the field will say transformative justice. It is, how do we really, build up like a world that, so that all of our different needs can be met, and that, we eliminate oppression and marginalization and causing harm and violence. I also, we didn't get to expand upon this further, but it was mentioned that policing often, targets marginalized communities. And so that is certainly something to hold and keep in mind when we're thinking about relying on the police as a form of response and justice, and knowing very oftentimes that those systems do cause further harm, which was something that, yeah, a lot of our folks in our group just talked about, really coming to a greater understanding and also thinking about how do we integrate that into our lives. And I'll leave it there. And I also welcome others from my group to speak on anything I may have missed.
Awesome. Would anybody from our group like to add anything else? All right. Getting good jobs. Thanks, Chelsea, for sharing out. And then Holly, I think you were going to share out from our group. Yep.
Yes. So we talked about a lot. We talked about how some of our assumptions have played into what we think of as appropriate punishment. Now we're realizing the tide of punishment. We talked about enforcement, that word enforcement, and how that really resonated with several individuals, how the definition of enforcement is so rooted in disciplinarian kind of actions. And then we talked a lot about different types of situations where de-escalation doesn't occur and why that might be with the police. And a few of those things we talked about how the culture within police force often overrides training they've had. So if you are a new officer, for example, you might be told that your training doesn't matter and now you're on the street and it's a different set of rules. So that's just one of the challenges that we deal with, as well as all of the human biases that individuals carry. We also talked about the healing part and where does that belong, and had an interesting discussion about if that could be tied in with the same enforcement mentality that we have today, or do we start over? And then we would have needed a lot more time to solve that question, I think, but it was a really good discussion. But if anybody else in the group wants to jump in, I would love that. I'm sure I missed things, important things.
I thought you did well. One thing that we did talk a little bit about was what does de-escalation mean, and what would it look like, as we were talking about what are some changes that could be made, is what does it look like if we had two equally empowered agencies, if you will, or one that enforced the laws, or were the rule keepers, if you will, and then one that was in charge of the healing spaces and treatment spaces going forward. There was some talk around it must be hard trying to do both within the same system because you're trained primarily in one and not really adequately trained in the other. And then also treatment around minors, how we are beginning this so early and treating minors oftentimes as adults instead of as the minors that they are. So yeah, nice job, Polly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, y'all, for your conversation, your insight, your thoughts. We are nearing the end of our conversation, but I did want to provide space if anybody in the Zoom room has any questions of the panel, to the panel. If there was something that was mentioned that you want to know more about, or if you just had a general question that popped in your mind while they were discussing. We've got a few minutes here that we can allow some of that time and space. So you can either type it into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll see what we got.
I've got a question. I don't have experience with this, so I don't know, but I did watch I Will Destroy You, the TV show. I don't remember if it's Netflix, but anyway, it's about somebody in the UK who experienced sexual assault. And it was very interesting to me. Lots of things were interesting about the show, but it was very interesting to me how their system treated her. And I don't believe our system treats rape victims the same way. I mean, she went in, she had a female appointee. I don't even know if they were an officer, meet with her. There was counseling, there was follow-up, there was immediate action. There was a lot of attention given to her. I don't know if it's really like that in the UK, but my perception is that it's not that way here. So if any of you has experience professionally or anecdotally, I would be interested.
So your question is whether or not in this country, whether or not victims of violence or sexual assault are treated in the same way. One of the problems with our system when it comes to violence on that interpersonal level is we are almost our own worst enemies on how we solve things, right? In the area of sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, 98% of a case moving forward relies on the person who's been victimized remembering, right? Having the right details, being believable, looking in a way that looks believable, right? And that's how our criminal justice system solves crimes and purportedly holds people accountable or punishes them, whatever, based on our conversation tonight. And so I find that the system gets pretty hot and heavy about making sure people remember what they need them to remember. And that becomes before the idea of feeling safe. That becomes before the idea of believing you in the way that you remember things. We know when we experience trauma, the way we remember things unfolds. And that is a human being way of functioning, not a way of functioning if you have been a victim of a crime or experienced trauma. We all unfold those things the same way. It's how our brains are built, right? So I don't find I think when you get somebody who's purportedly seeking justice, right, which is the words that they'll use, identifying, labeling, and having evidence to say someone is a bad person, regardless of how I get that information, or that if it's a secondary trauma to you as a victim, I think quite honestly is how our system runs more consistently. I think there's always cases where there's isolated officers or an isolated attorney or something like that. So it's not that experience necessarily for everyone, but that's really based on the individual attributes of that person and their understanding of justice, their understanding of trauma, and their understanding, honestly, to be not fall into line with the system. So that's, I guess, my opinion and what I've seen happen.
So I started, so my other job is I work for Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, and I'm their sexual violence program coordinator. And I started to watch I May Destroy You, and there's so much validity to what our survivors go through here in the States that I couldn't finish it. So it is, yeah, so it only to agree with Jessyca too. I also think that what we do is survivor stories are then put on trial to determine the validity of if it's true. And it could be, and again, like what Jessyca was saying, how we process trauma is completely different. We don't highlight that at all. It's like this person remembered this 2 days ago, but now they remember this. And then we start to question, which essentially most places say don't interview or ask questions for 48 hours because we need to have a good sleep and let our mind like process all the things. And we don't do that way. We're like, okay, we got to do this, and you got to tell me everything. And in 2 days, if you remember more, then maybe you're not telling the truth, right? So, and even posing questions of, did you say no, or did you? And again, putting it back on survivors as if it was their fault. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was what I was afraid of. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Holly, for asking. We have time for probably one more question. Christy was first. Let's see what hers is. What is/are our action steps? How do we as individuals confront and dismantle systems of violence?
For me, I believe that we need to speak these things. We need to air the dirty laundry. We need to hold accountability, and that doesn't necessarily mean punitively, but we need to be able to have open, safe spaces to have conversations just like this. And then we move forward from there. And we have to include empathy and compassion. I think forgiveness is another huge component as well.
I also think too, as we're having these conversations, making sure we have everybody at the table. We tend to pick and choose out of a place of comfort. Like, I don't want this person or I don't want that person because it might make me feel uncomfortable. And we don't challenge that enough. So the saying, what is it? We have people on the menu, but not at the table, right? So making sure that everybody's at the table and their voices are uplifted and held.
Well, I think actually having conversation, I like the question because I think sometimes what feels better or is more exciting and alluring is looking at really grandiose kind of big things that we do to tear things down, right? And we get busy. And although I do think there's a time and a place for that, I think that's what makes this reform feel more like a movement as opposed to a place of being. In who we are and how we function as a nation, as communities, and our family. And that change is little by little, right? That makes it sustainable and authentic. This may translate and it may not, but I'm big on analogies. So I think of like when you're someone who's has decided that health and wellness are gonna be your thing, right? What's fun is to get this like diet that has a whole bunch of tools, right? So who's gone out and like, it's like I'm going to get shakes in a blender and I'm going to work out 3 times a day and we're going to go ahead and do this, right? What's harder, right, is to commit to understanding our relationship to food, what has us feeling energetic, making small changes along the way. It's less sensationalized, it's less glamorous, and it takes a longer commitment, and it takes support and connection and tools that last a long time, and it becomes who we are. And I kind of see it, as the same way. One of the things that I ask myself in this work is getting better at practicing the pause, which I think can actually help with solve a lot of our issues. But the pause is not necessarily that you're doing anything different, but slowing down enough to pause to ask two questions. One is justice for who? And the other is it my job to punish? And I think if we were to all slow down enough, if I'm the teacher in the classroom that has a student who is a disruption, is it my job to punish? And what does justice actually look like in this, right? If we were to slow down a little bit and practice that pause, I think we'd come with new solutions. I think we'd engage with each other differently. And I think that's where this work starts. And there are days that I wish it was big and grandiose and, you know, let's burn it all down. But I don't know. I know from my perspective that is not how we create sustainable and authentic change that leads to changing us in who we are and how we present in our communities.
Well, y'all, thank you so much. We are at the end of our conversation here. I just want to thank Tia, Carla, Jessyca, Pam, Paulina, and Andres for being here, providing their awesome knowledges and/or services to add and supplement to this, excuse me, I had a little hiccup there, to this critical conversation. In the chat, y'all, was I muted that whole time? Oh my gosh.
Not the whole
Was it?
time, just when you said in the chat.
Oh, I was gonna be like, yo. Okay, so in the chat, I will repost our evaluation as well as the next two conversations that we are going to have in our Table Talk series with the registration link as well. Perfect. Thank you. So please just click it and open it. If you don't have time to do it tonight, that's fine. Just leave it open. Like Dominic said in the beginning, we value your feedback. You as well will be sent an email by the end of the week tomorrow or later by Thursday or so, outlining our conversation as well as supplemental materials for you to take away from this space so you can continue to have this conversation. With that, I don't have anything else. Dominic, do you?
No, thank y'all for being here. Thank you to our awesome panel tonight.
Y'all get 2 minutes back. Go do something awesome with the rest of your night. Thank you, and we appreciate you.
Enjoy.